The Indianapolis Colts defensive line needs to take a massive step forward in 2025. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of horseshoehuddle.com. Jake is not here today, but don't worry. I have a fun show planned for you guys. We're going to be talking all about this Colts defensive line heading into 2025. We're continuing our series on positional previews. Yesterday, we did the quarterback position, so definitely check that out if you're interested in all of our thoughts on this Colts quarterback room heading into 2025. Today, we are grouping the entire defensive line together, so defensive ends, defensive tackles, top of the roster, bottom of the roster. We're going to talk about all of those guys here today. So we're going to go starters, we're going to go key rotation players, and then fringe roster guys, and kind of break down every single aspect of this defensive line room. So let's kick it off with the starters here on today's show. We have Laiatu Latu off the edge. He is pretty much going to be a solidified starter this year. There might be some question on if JT Tuimoloau or Samson Ebukam really can eat into those snaps. But for the most part, Laiatu Latu, in my opinion, is going to go from being a guy last year who was mostly a designated pass rusher to being a full-time starter in 2025. Kwity Paye is likely to be the defensive end starting alongside him. Again, there's some up in the air if a Tuimoloau guy or Ebukam can surpass him in camp, but that seems very, very unlikely. And then the two defensive tackles, DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart, these guys have been among the best in the sport for years, and they're going to continue being that this next season. So when we're looking at this starting defensive line room and just what the Colts are going to look like on base downs with these guys, it's a pretty solid group on paper, but it's something that needs a bit more. Like, these guys need to produce a bit more this next season. I think last year it was perfectly fine up front, but they need more than just fine. Kwity Paye led the way with, I believe, according to Pro Football Focus, he had 10 sacks last year, but a lot of those are half sacks that PFF counts as full sacks, and a lot of them were kind of cleanup sacks as well. Laiatu Latu had a better pass rush win rate than Kwity Paye, but didn't really finish on the sacks. He had 4.5 last year. I believe it was like 5 is what PFF gave him there. DeForest Buckner missed some time with injury last season, but overall was DeForest Buckner. And then Grover Stewart, you're not going to get that pass rushing upside with him, but you're going to get one of the best run defending nose tackles in the league. So yeah, like, again, Paye and Latu had very, very different seasons last year. Paye, a good run defender, cleaned up a lot of sacks, finished the job a lot, but just didn't really get constant pressure. Latu did get a little bit better on the pressure side of things, but just didn't finish sacks. Buckner was still Buckner. Stewart was still Stewart. So, yeah, I think there is a step forward to take with these guys this next season. And just in terms of Laiatu Latu getting more snaps, finishing more sacks, maybe even getting that pressure rate up a little bit higher as well. You can't complain too much about that. And then for Paye, just getting that pass rush win rate up a little bit more. These two defensive ends are very athletic, very talented players. And when we're looking at their contract situation, Paye is getting that 5th-year option this year. Laiatu Latu is getting paid like a top 15 pick. Like, these guys got to produce this next season. It's really on them to see how far this Colts defensive line room goes. Because like I said, Buckner and Stewart, we kind of know what we're going to get out of those guys. You're going to get really good defensive tackle play from the both of them whenever they're on the field, and that's great for the Colts. But really the X factor on this defensive line is, what do the Colts get out of Laiatu Latu? What do they get out of Kwity Paye? Because that will make or break this season up front on defense for the Colts. If they get much of what they got last year, this Colts defense will have some struggles because they're not able to generate consistent pressure and finish plays. But if they can go back to what they were doing in 2023 or take a different unique step in 2025, I think we could see really good defense from the Colts because they have the talent in the secondary. It's just, will this defensive line talent really step up and really prove itself to be better than what it was last season, where the pressure was just way too inconsistent for a defensive line room that's getting paid what this defensive line room is getting paid, and that number only jumps up this next season. So yeah, those are the 4 guys who are likely going to start. I think we'll see a lot of them on rundowns, obviously, especially with Paye. I think Latu will be the guy who subs out a little bit more on rundowns, but for the most part, he was pretty fine in run defense last year. I don't really see a reason to have him be like a designated pass rusher like he was as a rookie. So I expect him to get a good chunk of snaps on rundowns, and I think he's going to have a bigger role under Lou Anarumo than what he did have under Gus Bradley. I think one little wrinkle that we got to throw in here, though, when we're talking starters is obviously when the Colts are going to be facing like 3rd and 7s from opposing offenses or just like 3rd down and passing situations, Grover Stewart's unlikely to be on the field. So I actually went back and watched a lot of Lou Anarumo's defenses the last couple of years and say, like, okay, what do they do on 3rd downs? Do they bring in a defensive end to play on the interior like Gus Bradley did? Do they have designated pass rushers at defensive tackle? Or what do they really do on those 3rd downs, like where Bradley had the NASCAR package? Do they do a similar thing under Lou Anarumo? And watching the film really didn't give me any answers, just in terms of like what he does on each third. Every 3rd down is different with Anarumo. There were some sets where there was 3 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers. There were some sets where it was 4 defensive ends across the line. There were some sets where they kept the Grover Stewart, which was DJ Reader over there in Cincinnati. They kept him on the field instead. So it's really hard to gauge what the Colts are going to do about that 5th starter on the defensive line, which is that designated pass rusher who comes in those like NASCAR packages. Is there even going to be a NASCAR package this season is the big question with Lou Anarumo. So it's kind of hard to factor in who's going to be that 5th starter. You could say it could be JT Tuimoloau, who's maybe the direct replacement for Adayo Adengbo as that interior rusher. They could go back to a Tyquan Lewis, who did it early in his career with the Colts, or maybe it's someone like Adetomiwa Adebawore, who comes in and is just that interior pass rusher at defensive tackle, or maybe Grover Stewart takes a big step as a pass rusher, and we have Grover Stewart out there on 3rd downs. I think anything is on the table there as that 5th starter on the defensive line, but just looking at these 4 guys, they obviously have the talent. Health is going to be a big thing. Kwity Paye has not played a full season in his career. DeForest Buckner has missed some time in recent years. Grover Stewart obviously had that suspension a couple of years back. So there are some question marks in terms of health and consistency. So it's not going to be all on these guys because the backups are going to play a good bit. But you want to see, obviously, Stewart and Buckner keep their level of play they've kept the last couple of years, and then just Paye and Latu take that next step. I think it's more realistic with Latu at this point. Paye has kind of been who he's been in the NFL, which is a fine player, but Laiatu Latu is really the guy that we're looking at here in 2025 to make or break this defensive line, because if he can take that next step forward and really grow into that top 15 pick that the Colts spent on him, then I think this defensive line is looking really good. But if he plays a lot more like he played as a rookie last year, which was fine, but nothing to write home about, then I think we're looking into some question marks up front. And if the Colts can get that consistent pressure and maybe questioning whether or not they did enough to address the defensive end depth this offseason, like losing Adayo Adengbo and not really replacing him with anyone besides a draft pick. So, yeah, I think it's a fine defensive line group, some good upside with Latu and Paye. We're kind of banking a lot on Buckner and Stewart staying healthy, but that's kind of the nature of just defensive line play across the league in general. I think it's a pretty solid group. The Colts are paying a lot of money to this group. Buckner and Stewart are getting like $36 million a year combined. You're looking at Latu getting a top 15 pick salary and Paye is getting that 5th-year option. They're paying a lot of money on this defensive line, so it needs to produce this year. It needs to be unique and diverse and really produce as a pass rushing group. I think they have all the talent to do it. It's just, can they put it together will be the big thing for this Colts team. But enough of the starters. The starters are fun, but they're also kind of boring because we always hear about them. So let's go to the backups, talk about some of these unique, different names coming into the Colts, and really discuss what their role could be this upcoming season. But first, do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where the heck did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you just stop managing your money and start building your wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check on your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can share You're tracked in personal accounts. You can set goals and stay on the same page without all that stress. So take control of finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at Monarch Money for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Alrighty, Locked On Colts everydayers, we are back talking about this Colts defensive line room, talking about the starters, and now we're going on to the key backups. And I think this is a bit tougher to talk about than the starters because unlike the starters, like we know who the 4 names are going to be starting for the Colts. Maybe one guy gets pushed back a little bit here. But when it comes to who the main backups are, I think there's a lot up in the air for this Colts team. I think we can confidently say that a player like JT Tuimoloau, their second-round pick in this past draft, is going to have a massive role on this team. Outside of that, though, I think there's a lot of names up in the air. I mean, Samson Ebukam is coming back from his Achilles injury. The Colts are excited about him, but a near 30-year-old pass rusher coming back from a major injury like this that usually takes 2 calendar years to get back to your form, I think there's some concerns there. Tyquan Lewis took a big step back this past season, and he's been fine as a run defender, but the pass rushing really wasn't there this past season. And then you look at a defensive tackle that they're bringing in Neville Gallimore, who had a solid season for the Rams last year, but again, not really something to write home about. More of a 3-tech than a 1-tech. And the backup 1-tech is really what they've been looking for these last couple of years. So these guys are probably the inside track guys to be your primary backups for the Colts this next season, but I think there's a lot up in the air with these guys. I don't know if these 4 guys are your primary backups come week 8 this upcoming season. Like, we don't know what Ebukam's going to look like throughout the course of a long season. Tyquan Lewis, we don't know if his body can hold up, or even if it does, the pass rushing juice might not be good enough. And then Gallimore, again, it's so hit or miss. If he could be anywhere as far as like the 3rd defensive tackle that gets 30-40% of the snaps, or he could miss the roster entirely depending on what happens in camp. So the only guy we can really talk about with any confidence here is the young guy, which is JT Tuimoloau, where the Colts very, very much like this guy in the draft. They coveted him for a good chunk of the draft period. Really, really great run defender. I think he's going to have an early role rotating in there on a couple of rundowns, maybe playing some 3-tech on some rotations and on like 3rd and longs or 2nd and longs, getting some inside rushes as well. And I think with his traits, the long arms, the power, I think he transitions well as a pass rusher in the NFL. So I think he's going to have a big role. Lou Anarumo and his defensive staff obviously had a hand in drafting him. So that's going to be a big part of this puzzle here, where a lot of these other guys are already kind of established from a previous regime, where with Tuimoloau, this was a guy that Lou Anarumo had a hand in picking. So I do think that gives him a pretty good chance to make an impact in year 1. We'll see how big of an impact. Like, maybe it's more just on the rundowns side of things rather than the passing downs, but I do think he's going to have a pretty sizable role. Then, we're looking at these other guys like Ebukam, man, it's such a wild card. Like, you're really talking about a $1 scratch-off ticket here. I know I use that term quite a bit on this podcast, but like, you're really banking on something that we don't really get from pass rushers, which is that production from an older pass rusher pretty quickly off of an Achilles injury. Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen have given their support to Ebukam and stuck by him. And, they had a really good chance to get off of that contract and free up some cap space this offseason, but they didn't. They're deciding to roll with an older player, again, coming off this injury. So they have full belief in him. It's hard for me to share that belief when we have a lot of data saying how bad Achilles injuries are for defensive ends and just defensive linemen in general. But I guess we'll have to see. I don't want to write off Ebukam. Like, if anyone can do it, this guy can. He's had the work ethic. He's a guy who's worked his way up from a day 3 pick in the draft years ago to being, a 10+ sack guy when he's healthy. It's just at this age and with the health coming off of that Achilles injury, I'm not sure he can get back to that level. But I would be very happy for him to prove me wrong. It's just, I'm trying to be realistic here when we're looking at Ebukam going forward, and it's kind of tough to be optimistic about this Colts defensive end rotation if he's going to get your 3rd most snaps, on that outside, especially on pass rushing downs, because I don't know if he's going to have the juice to be an effective pass rusher when we already have questions about Kwity Paye as a pass rusher. We even have some questions about Laiatu Latu as a pass rusher. Throwing another guy with even bigger questions as a 3rd guy behind them, is a bit concerning for me. I think he can get there. It's just very unlikely. So it's tough with Ebukam. It's really tough to really talk about this because all the data is against him, and the Colts are really betting on like a big time outlier for him to be productive this season. But we can't close the book entirely. Like maybe that outlier comes to fruition. We'll have to see you there. Tyquan Lewis, I think, is just a high floor, kind of low ceiling type of reserve player. The Colts have loved this player for a long time. Great in the locker room. Does some really good things for the Colts. Probably just a better run defender than pass rusher at this point in his career. It kind of sucks. A lot of those early injuries in his career did zap a little bit of his explosiveness and zap a little bit of his pass rushing ability, but there's still a quality player there. He might be getting paid a little bit too much for his role, but overall, a perfectly fine rotational player that I think Lou Anarumo is going to find some utility in. And then Neville Gallimore, we haven't talked about Neville Gallimore much on this podcast since the Colts signed him because it was kind of a low contract they gave him, but fantastic athlete, great size. You would like to see him play with a little bit more power and just balance in his game and be more of a one tech than a three tech. But I do think there is some utility in having a player with his size and athleticism, at least for shooting gaps and disrupting plays. I know the Colts want to go a little bit more two gap this year with their interior defensive line, so it's kind of a weird fit with a player like Gallimore. But I think, you can work him in there every now and then, especially against like zone run teams, and he can take away a lot of those zone tracks and those zone angles and free up things for the Colts linebackers at the second level. So yeah, I mean, this is the main four guys that back up the starters on the Colts defensive line this year. I think it's perfectly fine. I do question a little bit, though, just taking these risks on an Ebukam, taking the risk on like even a Tyquan Lewis or like a Gallimore, guys who haven't had the greatest track record in recent years. And really, your only guy that you're really having a lot of faith in is a young second-round pick that you just selected. So the depth is a little bit concerning on the defensive line. And that's with the starters having a couple questions as well, especially in terms of pay as a pass rusher, and Latu maybe a little bit as a run defender. So we'll have to see if this is as big a factor in the regular season as I'm expecting. Just looking at it right here, I'm a little concerned, honestly, looking at those main four guys, the backups. But again, I'm happy to be proven wrong. Hopefully, Ebukam can get back to that 2023 level. Maybe Tyquan Lewis can find some little bit of his last legs and provide some pass rushing juice. One thing I will add, because I have a little bit of space here in the second segment to really add it, is that with Lou Anarumo's system, opposing offenses are going to hold the ball at least a little bit longer. Like, I'm not saying it's going to be holding the ball for 4 seconds back there every single pass, but maybe a little bit of a tick longer than what Gus Bradley was having with his defense last year, where quarterbacks were getting the ball out in like 2.4 seconds against the Colts, which is insanely fast, and it's hard to create pressure when other teams are throwing the ball that fast. So maybe with Lou Anarumo, say quarterbacks are holding it to 2.9, 3.1, whatever it's going to be, just that little bit tick longer of holding the ball could help just production and overall ability of this Colts defensive line. So coverage and pass rush go hand in hand. I think the coverage will be better this year, so pass rush should be better. But I do have some concerns with the Colts second string, just backup defensive linemen, just because they're betting on some outliers in terms of injuries and age and just past production with those players. But we'll see if those guys step up, or if any player in our final group, our segment 3, our bubble players, our practice squad guys, or even guys who, again, could impress and earn a bigger role in training camp. These are the true wild cards on the Colts roster. We're going to talk about them here in just a second. All right, Locked On Colts Everydayers, we are back previewing the Colts defensive line heading into the 2025 season. We talked about the starters at the top of the show. We talked about the backup or the key reserves in the last segment. Now let's talk about guys who were anywhere from on the bubble to practice squad guys to maybe even being guys who have this wide variance of like they could be in that back of that key reserve segment that I just talked about. They could go as high as that, or they could be off the roster entirely depending on what happens in training camp. These are your real wild cards on the Colts roster. And let's start with obviously the biggest name on here, and that is defensive tackle Adetomiwa Adebawore, a player that the Colts took in the 4th round 2 years ago. He hasn't seen much run on defense in his career with the Colts, but gosh, he is such a fantastic athlete. I mean, he ran a 4.49 at the combine at 281 pounds, has been playing on kickoff teams for the Colts and making some plays on kickoff teams, which is crazy for a player wearing number 95 running down there making tackles on kickoff coverage. And he's had enough flashes as a pass rusher to get you excited. It's just the run defense hasn't really been there. Got a little bit better last year, but the run defense really hasn't been there fully. I do think with the Colts going more two-gapping on the defensive line, it's a really tough fit for him at defensive tackle, but I think there are some unique ways that Lou Anarumo can get him involved, whether it's, those three defensive line sets, you have him rushing off the edge, along with your three linebackers, you're going to have the field. If you go to like a much smaller pass rush package, you can get Adetomiwa on the field. Like, I think there are unique ways to get him more involved as a pass rusher and utilize some of that ability that he has. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, where the Colts might not really have a NASCAR package type guy, a guy that comes in like Dayo Dangbo did last year and rushes when Grover Stewart's off the field. I very much think Adetomiwa Adebawore is a player that's going to be considered that next guy up. I think he's going to be in that running with a Tuimoloau, with a Neville Gallimore, with some of these other players that are on the Colts roster. And honestly, he might be the best pure pass rusher of that next group of players. So if he can just continually improve that run defense, be a little bit more stout against double teams, and earn his place with this new coaching staff, I think his ability as a pass rusher can be really good in the NFL. It's just getting those final steps forward and solidifying himself as a guy. Honestly, I'd probably put him in the segment that we just did. I'd probably put him up there. It's just, you never know with a new coaching staff coming in, who they're going to favor and where they're going to go with that. Another guy who falls into a similar category is Isaiah Land. He wasn't drafted by the Colts, but he was quickly claimed at the end of the offseason 2 years ago. The Colts have had him marinating at the bottom of the roster the last couple years. And he's such a unique player because he can play off-ball linebacker. He did a little bit in college. But he's mostly been an edge rusher in the NFL, really good hands, a player who is good run defender as well. I think there's been some flashes of pass rusher in the last couple years with the Colts. Like, I think he can be a really solid player. It's just, can he take that next step with this new coaching staff? Can he earn a place and maybe surpass a Tyquan Lewis this offseason, or maybe surpass a Samson Ebukam if Ebukam isn't really getting back to what his past form looks like? I do think there's an opportunity for him in this training camp. It's just he needs to show that he's taking that next step and growing as a player to be more than just a bottom of the roster guy. So him and Adetomiwa Adebawore, like, they probably have the inside track of these wildcard guys to make the roster, but they do need to take that next step and hopefully, surpass some of these guys on the roster who are older than them, and they really just need to take advantage of this opportunity this offseason. So very, very big fan of both players, but it really comes down to them to take that next step and hopefully emerge as real rotation players this year rather than just being project guys sitting at the bottom of the roster for yet another season. I think the time is now. We're going to year 3 for both of these guys with the Colts. The NFL stands for not for long. You don't get forever to just develop and sit behind. So going into year 3, it's really time for these guys to take that step where the Colts are going to move on to different projects that they think are younger and have more worthwhile investment in those players. And one of those guys is defensive tackle Tim Smith that the Colts just drafted out of Alabama, a player who's a really good run defender in college. Not the greatest athlete overall, but the production was really good. I think his final game against Michigan was one of the best defensive tackle films I've watched in a couple of years. It was awesome. So many run stops in that game, really powerful hands, physical player. And when you look at this Colts defensive line, aside from Grover Stewart, you really don't have any high-level run defenders. I guess Kwity Paye is a pretty good run defender as well. And we'll have to see if JT Tuimoloau gets to where it was in college. But you don't really have many high-level run defenders, especially on the interior. So a player like Tim Smith really has that opportunity to come in, solidify himself as a really good run defender, and give this Colts roster something that they really don't have behind their starters. Again, which is a guy who can actually eat up two gaps and really defend the run at a high level and free up things for linebackers behind them. So I'm very bullish on Tim Smith. I think he can be a really good player for the Colts. I would prefer him over Gallimore, I think, honestly, just in terms of how they fit with this scheme. But obviously you're going to need like 4 or 5 defensive tackles just in the system this year. So Smith certainly factors in there alongside a player like a Gallimore and alongside a player like an Eric Johnson, who the Colts obviously loved Eric Johnson for years, had to make the tough decision to cut him in roster cut downs last year. Chris Ballard obviously did not love that. And less than a year later, he's already back on the Colts roster. As he got released by the New England Patriots, the Colts quickly grabbed him. And Eric Johnson returns for a second stint with the Colts. Johnson always had some good moments, but for a player that's around 300 pounds, like he just always struggled at the point of attack on the interior with the Colts. And I'm hoping that he can be a little bit more powerful and stout to really make this roster. Because like I was just talking about with Tim Smith, that's where Tim Smith really excels. Eric Johnson didn't really excel at that. And that's really where he really needed to, because the Colts had pass rushers. They just didn't have run defenders behind their defensive tackles. So for Johnson to make this team, he's got to show that he can take that next step as a run defender. He hasn't really shown it thus far in the NFL, but maybe year 4, year 5, whatever it is for him is finally the time for him to turn it around. There are a couple other defensive linemen the Colts have at the roster: Darrell and Chami, Desmond Little, and Devontae Davis. Davis is really intriguing as a 280-pound defensive tackle that ran, I think, like a 4.7 at his pro day this offseason out of Florida Atlantic. I think there's some athletic upside there. Probably more of a practice squad guy than a regular roster guy, but the Colts clearly have some interest in him. And then Desmond Little out of UAB, very long, very explosive, powerful player. Didn't have a ton of production in college, but you're really betting on the trades with him. Another player who feels like more of a practice squad type guy. But as I mentioned in the last segment, like the rotation is really up for grabs with a lot of these players. Like it really is a situation where if a player like Desmond Little just had a great offseason and it all clicked for him in the pre-draft process and like, oh, wow, like this kid's finally getting it. I don't think the Colts' depth is at this super high level to where he can't climb up and earn a roster spot. Like Isaiah Land has been here for a couple years, but he's certainly not at a spot where like his position is guaranteed. And then even if you want to climb higher, again, like Ebukam and Tyquan Lewis, like there are names that we recognize, but with Ebukam coming off his injury, Tyquan Lewis kind of taking a step back last year, there is an opportunity in camp for these players to be passed up by younger, more intriguing options. So all these players I mentioned here in this final segment, I really want to call them wild cards because it truly is a wild card where these guys could end up. They could all be the key backups for the Colts if they have great summers, or they could all be off the team. Like the options are endless with these players here. So it really comes down to what kind of offseason these guys had, how quickly they get this new system coming in, and how well they fit what Lou Anarumo wants to do. But as I've mentioned, I'm bullish on Adetomiwa and Tim Smith. I think these two players can be really solid players for the Colts, and I hope that they're able to earn roster spots out of camp, but we'll certainly see how Lou Anarumo sees it by the end of training camp. But that's what we have for the Colts defensive line positional preview. I think it's mostly the same names as last year. You get JT Tuimoloau coming in for Dayo Adangbo, and then a couple other intriguing young players, but really the Colts are banking on the young players taking a next step, so Laiatu Latu taking that next step, and then Lou Anarumo's system giving them more opportunities to get after the passer compared to where Gus Bradley's system was letting opposing quarterbacks get the ball out super quick. So that's really what the Colts are banking on. We'll see if it can come to fruition this year. Hopefully everyone can stay healthy, and this Colts pass rush can get back to what they were looking like in 2023 compared to what they look like this past season in 2024. But thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on socials. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.